In our last video, we saw Paul warn against those that would condemn or judge the believers at Colossae for not following the Mosaic rituals and even the old dietary laws. Now, Paul is now going to warn against teachers of another sort, but they're very similar in the same thing. Now, some people believe that Paul is referencing a very specific teacher in verses 18 and 19. The reason for that is at the end of verse number 18, it makes a reference to his fleshly mind. Now, some people believe that that's talking specifically about an individual, or it could be just that Paul is making a generic reference to a certain group of teachers. Either way, verse 18 is going to deal with the false teaching, while verse number 19 is going to again give the biblical worldview. He's going to emphasize the biblical worldview as the antidote. Now, Paul is further emphasizing in these two verses that any teaching which makes little of Christ is a dangerous teaching. So let's get into it. Whenever we come to verse number 18, there's a word at the beginning which captures our attention. That is the word beguile. Now, to beguile simply means to defraud, or we could say to deceive, or to be cheated. So these teachers are literally, they're deceiving, they're cheating, they're defrauding the believers at Colossae. And Paul warns them, don't be beguiled, don't be deceived, don't be cheated by these people. Well, how are they cheating them? How are they deceiving them? Well, these teachers, or a specific teacher, are holding to self-glorifying nonsense, as you could say in a summary of the content of verse number 18. You see, the teacher is emphasizing a false humility, worshiping of angels, a lifting up of personal visions over Scripture, something that is very prevalent nowadays. And this is all for the pride and the glorification of self. Now, there's a lot we could unpack there, but I think that as we just kind of march down through that, we can see the problem with each one of these. A false humility, somebody who plays humble just simply to make themselves look better in the eyes of man. Worshiping angels, I don't really think I have to hit on that a whole lot. I think we understand the problem with that. Emphasizing visions over Scripture, saying that a claim of special revelation, that is a dangerous thing. We hold to Scripture and Scripture alone. And again, this is all for pride and glorifying self. Then whenever we come into verse number 18, it says, and not holding the head. So this teacher is again, he's making very little of Christ. That's the whole idea. The head being a reference to Christ, who is the head of the body, which is the church. And so this teacher is making much of himself and much of man and very little of Christ. Now, this is kind of mirrors verse number 17 in just a few facets, in that, again, in how verse number 16 and 17, how basically the teachers there are also doing the same thing. They're making much of man, very little of God. The same thing happening here. They're making much of man, very little of God. So Paul is warning in these two verses, as well as 16 and 17, that any teaching which makes much of man and little of Christ is a dangerous teaching. Now, this is very prevalent today, whereas there's so many ministries and there's so many teachers out there, false and you name it, that their whole idea is they make much of man. Now, some of this would be maybe a money grab. That's what some of it could be all in all about. But sometimes it's a power grab. But either way, it's a dangerous teaching. One way that this is shown nowadays, and sometimes the teacher doesn't even realize that what he's doing is wrong, is whenever he stresses relevance in his preaching, and so that, well, that way it sounds appealing to the individual. Now, relevance, we have to understand that all Scripture is given by inspiration and is profitable. So all Scripture is relevant. And any biblical message, of course, is going to be relevant because all Scripture is relevant. But that's not what I'm talking about here. There's some people that go a step beyond, and they make their teaching so relevant, if you will, that they make the teaching all about man and very little about God. And that is something that we need to be aware of whenever we listen to people as well. So again, beware of teachers that would make much of man and very little of God. So in verses 20 through 23, which we're going to look at in the next video, Paul is going to conclude his battle against the false teachers. And then when we come to chapters 3 and 4, he's going to present a new way of living. Going to be exciting videos. And well, really, in this new way of living is living as people who are completely engulfed in the example and the words of Christ. And as we could quote Dr. Tim Mackey, who said in summary of the book of Colossians, that no part of human existence remains untouched by the loving and the liberating rule of Jesus Christ. So we'll look at the next text in the next video. God bless you, and thank you for watching.